But yeah, the Indiana Fever, a lot of the Indiana Fever fans, as of right now, want Stephanie White to be fired. And look, I'm going to be honest, I can't blame them. If you want Stephanie White fired from the Indiana Fever, I can't blame you. Do I think the Fever should fire Stephanie White?
Fever fans are calling for Stephanie White to be fired, and after everything that's happened, it's easy to understand why. But the most interesting part of this situation is that making a coaching change right now could actually expose even bigger problems within the organization. Not because White has done a great job. Many fans clearly don't think she has. But because it would shine a spotlight on how deep the issues with roster construction, leadership, and overall direction really go.
Caitlin Clark saw how to get the team back in the game. And I think part of the reason why Steph White wasn't happy is because Caitlin Clark just did her own thing. And I hate when people are like, oh, Caitlin Clark and Maisha Hines-Allen were conspiring against the rest of the team and they did their own thing. No. Maisha Hines-Allen understands the assignment. Look, whatever you want to think about Maisha Hines-Allen, she cares about one thing and one thing only, is winning. It is very, very clear. She cares about winning. And she basically, I'd say Caitlin probably, look.
That's really the core of the issue. Last season, Caitlin Clark often played more freely under Christie's sides, trusting her instincts, pushing the pace, and creating offense naturally, and at times it worked extremely well. Players like Maisha Hines-Allen seem to understand the formula too. Get Clark the ball, set solid screens, create easy opportunities, and let the offense flow. But Stephanie White appears to have arrived with a very different vision for how the team should operate. Instead of building entirely around Clark's fast-paced improvisational style, White seems focused on implementing a more controlled and structured offensive system. She even publicly suggested she didn't want the offense relying too heavily on the Aaliyah Boston-Caitlin Clark two-player game, despite how effective that partnership looked at times. From her comments and coaching style, it feels like White wants a more traditional point guard approach when built around set plays, tempo control, and a system-first philosophy rather than constant improvisation.
So she hardly wanted a Maisha Hines-Allen two-man game. And look, there's a near 0% chance Stephanie White is coaching the Indiana Fever next year. Because I'm going to be real here. I don't think people understand this when coaches are when coaches don't adapt. Do you want to know why coaches don't adapt? Because if you don't adapt, even if you're losing, it shows your belief in your system and other teams will bite.
And that's the biggest change fans are noticing. The two-player game that once gave Indiana easy offense has almost completely disappeared. The pick-and-roll action that created open looks and fast scoring opportunities just isn't being used the same way anymore. At the same time, the Fever's pace looks noticeably slower compared to last season under Christie's sides. For a team that used to thrive in transition, that shift has raised a lot of questions. One sequence perfectly captures the issue. Caitlin Clark grabs a defensive rebound, pushes the ball up the floor herself, crosses half court, and then has to stop and wait for the rest of the team to catch up. When your point guard is the only player sprinting ahead in transition, something is clearly off. Indiana looked most dangerous when they played fast, attacked early, and let Clark create in space, but the current system seems far more focused on slowing the game down and running structured half-court sets instead.
Shown that she is a very good coach at taking a 3 out of 10 team, making a play like a 7 out of 10 team. That is actually, there are teams where that is a good coach for. That is not a team that has no defensive personnel, a dynamic guard who is fearless, flawed, but exceptional. And your second leading guard is a black hole. While your big is one of the best bigs in the league, but is slimmed down to run and you want her to go back in the post. It's one of those things where it just doesn't fit. The pieces don't fit. And you might say, oh, but look at the playoffs last year. It was the biggest fluke playoff run in history.
And here's the argument many critics keep bringing up about Stephanie White's playoff reputation. Some believe that postseason run may have said more about Atlanta collapsing late than Indiana truly dominating the series. The Dream had control of the game in the closing minutes, but made costly mistakes, including turnovers and defensive breakdowns that completely shifted momentum in Indiana's favor. Moments like the pass intercepted by Lexi Hull and the defensive miscommunication that gave Aaliyah Boston an easy basket became turning points. Because of that comeback, White received a lot of praise, But critics argue the Fever still struggled badly against stronger, more disciplined teams throughout the season. Their concern is that when opponents execute consistently and avoid late-game mistakes, Indiana's coaching issues and roster weaknesses become much more noticeable.
Don't bode well to having a team with Caitlin Clark. And it's very, very clear. Like, I've said this from the very start. Caitlin Clark, the player, is stoppable. Caitlin Clark, the system, is not. Like, you cannot stop Caitlin Clark, the system. And when you have a roster like Kelsey Mitchell stuff, or players like Kelsey Mitchell, Leah Boston, you should be able to live with it if the Caitlin Clark high pick and roll or Caitlin Clark running doesn't or breaks down. You should be able to live with it. And that's what Austin Kelly's playbook should be. The problem is that this team doesn't run anymore. Like, how many times does Caitlin Clark get the ball or come down with a rebound and she's running the floor with the ball in her hand and she gets past the halfway line and she's waiting for 4 players to run. And I'm like,
this is where the situation becomes more complicated. Stephanie White clearly has strengths as a coach. She's known for bringing structure, discipline, and organization to teams that may not have elite talent, helping average rosters compete above expectations. That coaching style can be extremely valuable for rebuilding teams trying to maximize limited pieces. But Indiana is no longer in that category. The Fever now have a fearless playmaker in Caitlin Clark, one of the league's most promising young stars in Aaliyah Boston, and proven scorers like Kelsey Mitchell. This roster has the potential to play fast, aggressive, and creatively instead of simply grinding out games through structure alone. That's where the philosophical tension appears. Stephanie White's system emphasizes controlled sets, discipline, and clearly defined roles, while Caitlin Clark's greatest strength is her ability to improvise and create opportunities that aren't drawn up on a clipboard. She processes the game at an incredibly fast level, often seeing passing lanes and scoring chances before defenses can react. Players with that kind of creativity usually thrive when given freedom to push the pace and play instinctively. The challenge for Indiana is figuring out whether the system should shape Clark's game or whether the system itself should evolve around her unique talent.
We are playing this way, otherwise you're going to be fired. And if the coach says, I'm playing my way, okay, you're gone. And by the way, people saying, oh, this is revisionist history. 8th of October 2024, someone said poach Stephanie White. Said Stephanie White, whose current philosophy is drag teams down to their level and try to win scoring in the 70s. So basically you're saying the fans who like see Stephanie White to run the court can stop her right now. I have described the Sun as vomit basketball.
So why don't they simply make a coaching change? That's where the situation gets tricky. Some critics believe the bigger issue goes beyond Stephanie White and points directly at the front office itself. The concern is that even if Indiana moved on from White, the organization might just replace her with another coach who follows the same traditional philosophy and approach. Instead of finding someone willing to fully build around Caitlin Clark's fast-paced creative style, they could end up repeating the same cycle with a different name on the sideline. Fans often compare this to organizations with stronger front office direction, where management establishes a clear identity for how the team should play and expects coaches to adapt to that vision. The criticism toward Indiana is that the Fever sometimes appear to lack that same level of decisive leadership and long-term clarity, leaving the team stuck between different basketball philosophies without fully committing to one.
We're in last place. They're like, this isn't on you. We're not firing you. There are coaches that have coached teams that have really struggled. But you don't fire them mid-season because you're going to be bad at it either way. I don't think firing Steph's going to make... I don't think firing Steph White's going to make the Indiana Fever this great team. It might improve Caitlin Clark. It probably will improve Caitlin Clark. But that's kind of it. Like, I don't think adding 2 points per game to Caitlin Clark is worth having to pay off.
At this point, the debate around Stephanie White comes down to one major question. Is she the right coach for Caitlin Clark and this version of the Indiana Fever? Many fans believe the answer is no. The criticism isn't just about wins and losses. It's about whether the current system actually maximizes what makes Clark special. Indiana looks slower in transition, less explosive offensively, and far more structured than the free-flowing style that helped Clark dominate in college and thrive during stretches of her rookie season. Critics argue that the offense is asking her to play more cautiously and within rigid sets, instead of letting her creativity take over naturally. Still, making a coaching change in the middle of the season may not solve the bigger problems. The roster has flaws. Aaliyah Boston's injury situation creates serious depth concerns, and the team's defensive issues won't disappear overnight with a new coach. That's why many believe the real decision has to come in the offseason, when the organization must fully commit to a direction. Either the Fever build a system entirely around Clark's fast-paced improvisational strengths, or they continue prioritizing a more controlled, system-heavy style of basketball. Trying to balance both approaches has created visible tension in how the team plays. The biggest concern for fans is that Indiana could waste valuable years of Clark's development by forcing her into a style that doesn't fully fit her strengths. Supporters want a coaching philosophy that gives her freedom to attack, push tempo, and create opportunities instinctively rather than constantly slowing the game down. At the same time, others still believe Stephanie White's structure and discipline can succeed with the right adjustments and roster balance. Ultimately, the Fever's future may depend less on whether White is a good or bad coach, and more on whether the organization has a clear vision for how it wants to build around one of the biggest stars women's basketball has ever seen.